for close upon a year, and came to the village of Astarma, very far to the north. There many of the king's weary soldiers deserted from his armies and settled down in Astarma and married Astarmian girls. By these soldiers we have the march of the armies clearly chronicled to the time when they came to Astarma, having been nigh a year upon the march. And the army left that village, and the children cheered them as they went up the street, and 5 miles distant they passed over a ridge of hills and out of sight. Beyond this less is known, but the rest of this chronicle is gathered from the tales that the veterans of the king's armies used to tell in the evenings about the fires in Zun, and remembered afterwards by the men of Zinar. It is mostly credited in these days that such of the king's armies as went on past Astarma came at last, it is not known after how long a time, over a crest of a slope, where the whole earth slanted green to the north. Below it lay green fields, and beyond them moaned the sea, with never shore nor island so far as the eye could reach. Among the green fields lay a village, and on this village the eyes of the king and his armies were turned as they came down the slope. It lay beneath them, grave with seared antiquity, with old world gables stained and bent by the lapse of frequent years, with all its chimneys awry. Its roofs were tiled with antique stones, covered over deep with moss. Each little window looked with a myriad strange cut panes on the gardens shaped with quaint devices and overrun with weeds. On rusted hinges the doors swung to and fro, and were fashioned of planks of immemorial oak with black knots gaping from their sockets. Against it all there beat the thistledown. About it clambered the ivy or swayed the weeds. Tall and straight out of the twisted chimneys arose blue columns of smoke, and blades of grass peeped upward between the huge cobbles of the unmolested street. Between the gardens and the cobbled street stood hedges higher than a horseman might look, of stalwart thorn, and upward through it clambered the convolvulus to peer into the garden from the top. Before each house there was cut a gap in the hedge, and in it swung a wicket gate of timber soft with the rain and years, and green like the moss. Over all of it there brooded age and the full hush of things bygone and forgotten. Upon this derelict that the years had cast up out of antiquity the king and his armies gazed long. Then on the hill slope the king made his armies halt, and went down alone with one of his chiefs into the village. Presently there was a stir in one of the houses, and a bat flew out of the door into the daylight, and 3 mice came running out of the doorway down the step. An old stone cracked in two and held together by moss, and there followed an old man bending on a stick with a white beard coming to the ground, wearing clothes that were glossed with use. And presently there came others out of the other houses, all of them as old, and all hobbling on sticks. These were the oldest people that the king had ever beheld, and he asked them the name of the village and who they were. And one of them answered, "This is the city of the aged in the territory of Time." And the king said, "Is Time then here?" And one of the old men pointed to a great castle standing on a steep hill and said, "Therein dwells Time, and we are his people." And they all looked curiously at King Karnith-zo, and the eldest of the villagers spoke again and said, "Whence do you come, you that are so young?" And Karnith-zo told him how he had come to conquer Time, to save the world and the gods, and asked them whence they came. And the villagers said, "We are older than always, and know not whence we came, but we are the people of Time, and here from the edge of everything he sends out his hours to assail the world, and you may never conquer Time." But the king went back to his armies and pointed towards the castle on the hill, and told them that at last they had found the enemy of the earth. And they that were older than always went back slowly into their houses with the creaking of olden doors, and there they went across the fields and past the village. From one of his towers Time eyed them all the while, and in battle order they closed in on the steep hill as Time sat still in his great tower and watched. But as the feet of the foremost touched the edge of the hill, Time hurled 5 years against them, and the years passed over their heads, and the army still came on, an army of older men. But the slope seemed steeper to the king and to every man in his army, and they breathed more heavily. And Time summoned up more years, and one by one he hurled them at Karnith Zo and at all his men, and the knees of the army stiffened, and their beards grew and turned grey, and the hours and days and the months went singing over their heads, and their hair turned whiter and whiter, and the conquering hours bore down, and the years rushed on and swept the youth of that army clear away, till they came face to face under the walls of the castle of Time with a mass of howling years, and found the top of the slope too steep for aged men. Slowly and painfully, harassed with agues and chills, the king rallied his aged army that tottered down the slope. Slowly the king led his warriors over whose heads had shrieked the triumphant years. Year in, year out, they straggled southwards, always towards Zun. They came with rust upon their spears and long beards flowing again into Astarma, and none knew them there. They passed again by towns and villages where once they had inquired curiously concerning Time, and none knew them there either. They came again to the palaces and gardens where they had waited for Time in the night, and found that Time had been there, and all the while they set a hope before them that they should come on Zun again and see its golden eaves. And no one knew that unperceived behind them there lurked and followed the gaunt figure of Time, cutting off stragglers one by one and overwhelming them with his hours. Only men were missed from the army every day, and fewer grew the veterans of Karnith Zo. But at last, after many a month, one night as they marched in the dusk before the morning, dawn suddenly ascending shone on the eaves of Zun, and a great cry ran through the army, "Alata! Alata!" But drawing nearer they found that the gates were rusted, and weeds grew tall along the outer walls. Many a roof had fallen, gables were blackened and bent, and the golden eaves shone not as heretofore. And the soldiers entering the city expecting to find their sisters and sweethearts of a few years ago saw only old women wrinkled with great age, and knew not who they were. Suddenly someone said, "He has been here too," and then they knew that while they searched for Time, Time had gone forth against their city and leaguered it with the years, and had taken it while they were far away, and enslaved their women and children with the yoke of age. So all that remained of the 3 armies of Karnith Zo settled in the conquered city, and presently the men of Zeenar crossed over the river Adis, and easily conquering an army of aged men, took all Alata for themselves, and their kings reigned thereafter in the city of Zun. And sometimes the men of Zeenar listened to the strange tales that the old Alatans told of the years when they made battle against Time. Such of these tales as the men of Zeenar remembered they afterwards set forth, and this is all that may be told of those adventurous armies that went to war with Time to save the world and the gods, and were overwhelmed by the hours and the years. End of section 10.